says it may have finally solved the biggest mystery in crypto, who Satoshi Nakamoto really is. And the man they're pointing to is not some random outsider, not some obscure name nobody has heard of, but one of the most important figures in Bitcoin history itself, Adam Back. So today, I'm not going to scatter in 10 different news items. We're focusing only on one thing, this investigation, what the New York Times actually claims, the strongest clues they put forward, the weak point in the case, why Adam Back is even a serious candidate in the first place. And at the end, I'm going to give you my honest opinion on whether this really proves anything. Because that's the key point here. The headline is huge, the promise is explosive, but does the article actually prove that Adam Back is Satoshi Nakamoto? That's a very different question. Hello everyone and welcome to Crypto Red, the crypto news channel. Let's start from the beginning. A huge New York Times investigation just dropped, written by John Carreyrou with Dylan Friedman. And the core claim is simple. After digging through all the emails, forum posts, mailing lists, linguistic clues, timeline, and a lot of things in Bitcoin history, Carreyrou believes Adam Back is Satoshi Nakamoto. Now, first of all, John Carreyrou is not just any journalist. This is the reporter who helped expose Theranos, the company of Elizabeth Holmes valued at $9 billion. So when he published a huge investigation like this, people pay attention. This is not some random user on Twitter posting stuff. This is not a really low effort blog. It's really a serious piece of reporting, and that's why the article has made so much noise. And the funny thing is that according to the article, this investigation really took off after Carreyrou watched that HBO documentary from last year. You know, the one that tried to unmask Satoshi and pointed into another direction. Well, he didn't find the conclusion convincing. You know, the conclusion was it was Peter Todd. But one moment caught his attention. It was Adam Back reacting very nervously when his own name came up as a possible Satoshi candidate. That apparently stuck in Carreyrou's mind and became one of the sparks for the whole investigation. Now, before we go into the clues, let's answer the basic question. Why Adam Back? Why is this even plausible? Well, because Adam Back is absolutely one of the few people on Earth who could fit the profile. He's British. That matters because one of the classic clues around Satoshi is the British flavor in the writing and the famous headline embedded in Bitcoin's Genesis block from the Times of London. He was also deep inside the cypherpunk movement, which matters even more. The cypherpunks were obsessed with privacy, censorship resistance, digital cash, and escaping financial surveillance. In other words, exactly the kind of environment from which Bitcoin would logically emerge. But the really important point is Adam Back created Hashcash in the 90s. And Hashcash is really, really important for Bitcoin. It's one of the foundational building blocks behind Bitcoin's proof of work system. Satoshi actually cited Back and Hashcash in the Bitcoin white paper. So from a purely technical perspective, Adam Back is not just near the story, he's really inside the DNA of Bitcoin itself. And of course, that alone does not prove he's Satoshi, obviously. But it does put him in the tiny circle of people who had the right ideas, the right skills, and the right ideology at the right timing. Now, let's talk about what the New York Times actually says. The article case is built on a big accumulation of clues, not on one single smoking gun. And that is really important because if you are expecting a wallet signature, a confession, I don't know, leaked private keys or a document where Adam Key writes, yes, I am Satoshi, you will not find that in this article. The article is a case built from patterns, overlaps, weird coincidences, technical history, wording, timing, and behavior. And one of the major foundations of the investigation is the large body of Satoshi writing that has become available over time, especially a trove of email exchange with Marty Malmi, one of Bitcoin's earliest collaborators. And those emails gave researchers much more context to work with than before. From there, the investigation went deep into the old cypherpunk universe, the cypherpunks mailing list, the cryptography mailing list, and the Hashcash mailing list. The reporting says they merge archives from all that into one searchable database, starting with more than 38,000 documents. They narrate 38,000 users, then narrowing it to 1,615 people with enough activity. And then they ended up with 620 candidates who had actually discussed digital money. And those 620 had written more than 130,000 posts. So this was not just, hey, Adam Back sounds kind of British, therefore he's Satoshi. They really tried to industrialize the search. Then they start looking for rare markers. They looked not only for broad style, but very specific things like unusual phrases, hyphenation habits, technical wording, certain grammatical quirks, and obscure references. For example, the article highlights that Satoshi repeatedly wrote proof of work with hyphens in the white paper, and that mattered because the original technical term had often been written without hyphens. And according to the investigation, only a tiny number of people on those lists wrote it that way. And when they cross-checked that with other rare signals, Adam Back stood out. Same thing with the phrase partial pre-image. Again, very few people used it in the relevant context, and Adam Back's ways of writing it reportedly lined up closely with Satoshi's usage. The article also points to expression like burning the money, which Satoshi used in a Bitcoin discussion and which Back had apparently used years earlier in digital cash context. Now, one thing I found very interesting is that the case is not only about linguistic similarity, it's also about conceptual similarity. And here, honestly, the article, gets stronger. Because when you go back into the late 90s, Adam Back was already writing about things that sound incredibly close to Bitcoin before Bitcoin existed. Digital cash outside the traditional banking system, a distributed architecture, scarcity, public verifiability, resistance to shutdown, and using computation as part of the monetary design. And this is what makes him such a serious suspect. It's not just that he was nearby, it's that he was thinking along almost the same lines years in advance. And the article also focused on timing. And this is one of the most discussed points. According to the New York Times, Adam Back was highly active on cryptography and digital cash topics on those mailing lists for years. Then Bitcoin appears and Satoshi becomes active during that key period, while Adam Back is strangely absent from the cryptography list. Later, after Satoshi disappears, Back suddenly comes back into Bitcoin, into the Bitcoin mailing list, and he comes back very aggressively and very quickly. And that timing on its own does not prove anything. People disappear from forums for all sorts of reasons. They get busy, they change jobs, they lose interest. Real life happens. But when you combine that with everything else, I understand why Carreyrou considered it really suspicious. Then there's another angle to the story, the stylometry. Basically trying to identify an author through written patterns. Carreyrou apparently worked with Florian Caffiero, a computational linguist, to compare the Bitcoin white paper with papers from 12 major Satoshi suspects. On one pass, Adam Back came out as the closest match, with Hal Finney very close behind. But this is very important, the result was not definitive. In fact, when the methodology was adjusted, the result became inconclusive. And this is exactly what I don't think people should oversell this article. Because even inside the investigation itself, one of the more scientific methods does not end with a clean victory. It leans towards Back at one point, then becoming conclusive. And that is interesting, that is meaningful, but it is not proof. There is also a very strange part involving B-Money and Weidai. If you don't know, B-Money is one of the key precursors often discussed in the history of Bitcoin. Satoshi cited both Hashcash and B-Money in the white paper, but there were emails suggesting that Satoshi only learned about B-Money from Adam Back when checking the citation of the Hashcash paper. Carreyrou found that suspicious because Back's own Hashcash paper already discussed B-Money. So if Satoshi had really read the paper he wanted to cite, how could he not already know about B-Money? That's one of the more intriguing details in the article. And according to the reporting, Back himself had previously suggested that maybe Satoshi pretended not to know about B-Money in order to avoid being triangulated too easily, which if you already suspect Back, it sounds almost too convenient. Again, this is not proof, but it is a weird and memorable clue. The article also spends time on the personal confrontation. Carreyrou met Back, emailed him, pushed him, then later confronted him more directly. The investigation describes him as becoming defensive on certain points, especially around why he disappeared from the cryptography list during Satoshi's active years and why he had implied elsewhere that he participated in the white paper discussion when apparently he had not. And there is one moment the article really leans on emotionally. Carreyrou says that during a discussion about one of Satoshi's quotes, "I'm better with code than with words," Adam Back answered in a way that sounded to Carreyrou like he was momentarily speaking as the author of the quote rather than merely talking about it. Basically, like a tiny slip. Now, personally, I'm very careful with that kind of thing, because when someone has been under pressure for months or for hours, being questioned by a journalist who clearly suspects him, it's easy to overinterpret nervousness, awkward phrasing, or conversational shortcuts. A slip is not the cryptographic proof. It's not even close. And that brings me to my biggest issue with the article. There's still no formal proof, none. And that's my honest opinion. This is a fascinating article. It's a serious article. It contains a lot more substance than the average I found Satoshi theory you see online. It clearly shows why Adam Back belongs in the top tier of plausible candidates. But at the end of the day, what does this actually prove? Does it actually prove it? No, it does not prove it. Because for me, the only truly decisive proof would be a signature made with the private keys associated with the earliest Bitcoin blocks mined by Satoshi. And that's the gold standard. That's the thing that ends the debate. Everything else is circumstantial, even if the circumstantial case is very strong. And here's also where I want to give my own view, because I don't want to pretend to be neutral here. I'm not. My feeling after all of this is the same. Adam Back is absolutely a credible candidate. He was in the right circles. He had the right ideas. He built Hashcash. He matches a lot of the world view of Satoshi. The article presents enough to say, yes, it could be him. But could is not the same as it is him. I'm slightly disappointed because the headlines creates an expectation of revelation, while the body of the article is ultimately a very strong detective case, not a final demonstration. And there's also another point I think people underestimate. What if Satoshi no longer has the keys? Think about it. Everyone says, well, if he's Satoshi, let him sign a message. Fine. But that only works if the keys still exist and are accessible. If they were lost, destroyed, fragmented, or otherwise inaccessible, then even the real Satoshi might no longer be able to provide the one proof that everybody demands. And honestly, one thing that has always pushed me in that direction is the simple fact that those early coins have not moved. You can interpret that in several ways. Maybe Satoshi is dead. Maybe Satoshi is ideologically committed never to touching them. Maybe Satoshi is multiple people. Maybe the keys are in cold storage somewhere and will never move. Or maybe, very simply, the keys are gone. And that has always seemed possible to me. In fact, I've said before that if Satoshi were alive, in control, and wanted to remove a major long-term uncertainty around Bitcoin, one very powerful move would be to destroy access to those coins publicly or send them to somewhere probably unspendable, to burn the coins. That would reassure the market in a totally different way. But we've never seen anything like that. And the market right now needs that with all the doubts around quantum and the fear of quantum computing. So yes, one possible explanation is that the keys are simply lost. Another thing worth mentioning is that this New York Times article enters a graveyard of previous Satoshi reveals. People have pointed at Nick Szabo, they've pointed at Hal Finney, they pointed at Peter Todd. We had the whole Craig Wright circus, which ended up being disastrous and fraudulent. So the bar is very high now. Every new theory enters the battlefield full of failed theories. That's why the crypto community is naturally skeptical. And Adam Back himself, after publication of the article, publicly denied being Satoshi. He said he is not Satoshi. He said he does not know who Satoshi is, and argued that the similarities come from people in the same technical world using similar language and sharing similar interests. And that defense is not absurd, by the way. Because when you are inside a small community of elite cryptographers all discussing digital cash, privacy, proof of work, and distributed systems, of course there will be overlap. Of course they will sound similar at times. And of course multiple candidates will know the same obscure references. That's also why people like Hal Finney remain compelling to many observers, and why some experts still think Satoshi may have been more than one person. So where do I land after reading all of this? Here's my conclusion. The New York Times did not conclusively reveal Satoshi Nakamoto. What it did do is publish the strongest mainstream case in a long time for Adam Back being Satoshi. It elevated him, in my view, from one of many in the rumor mill to one of the most serious candidates on the board, if not the most serious. The article is strong on context, strong on research, strong on pattern recognition, strong on historical fit, but it is weak in the one place that matters most, the conclusive proof. So if you ask me, did the New York Times solve the mystery? My answer is not fully. Or simply no. If you ask me, did they seriously strengthen the Adam Back theory? Then yes, absolutely. And if you ask me whether the article changed my view, I will say it did not make me certain, but it did make me take Adam Back more seriously than before. At the same time, I still think we should stay disciplined here. The crypto world has a bad habit of turning compelling narratives into certainty too quickly. And this is exactly the kind of story where you have to resist that temptation. Because once again, the clues are not proof. Patterns are not proof. Coincidences are not proof. A signature is a proof. And until we have that, or something equivalent to a signature, the mystery will not be fully solved or closed. Still, I'm not going to dismiss the article. It's a good article. It's a detailed article. It's worth reading. And if nothing else, it reminds everyone of something important. Bitcoin did not come out of nowhere. It emerged from a deep intellectual tradition. Cypherpunks, digital cash experiments, and anti-surveillance thinking, proof-of-work research, and decades of obscure online discussion. That word matters. That history matters. And Adam Back was undeniably one of the central people of that word. So yes, maybe it's him, maybe it isn't. But after this article, it's a lot harder to laugh off the possibility that it is him. That's what I wanted to tell you today. Tell me in the comments, do you think Adam Back is Satoshi Nakamoto? Do you think it's still just another smart but inconclusive theory? If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow for the next one. Bye-bye.